Hello there, a very good evening to all our viewers joining us here on Vantage Point. We are coming to you a week after a torrential rainfall wreaked havoc across many areas in Sri Lanka, with more than 20 lives lost and over 100,000 affected by the inclement weather. Now, when the country is facing such a disaster situation, something interesting was happening in the political arena. To talk about that, joining me here today is Dr. Dayan Jatilaka. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Zulfi. Good evening.
Doctor, this interesting thing that I'm talking about is the 20th Amendment to the Constitution.
Ah, yes.
So, the first question about this, why now?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think that the timing is off. Therefore, there's less of a chance of the 20th Amendment actually getting off the ground. Of course, it has been presented to the Speaker, and it will come up in a few weeks or months for debate. But I think it's singularly ill-timed. Right now, the appetite is not for constitutional change. That time came and went, if ever there was one.
So, Doctor, what's the reason for them to bring it now?
Do you want a short and brutally honest answer?
Definitely, Doctor.
I think it's a stop Gotabaya move by the JVP, possibly on behalf of some other political entities or forces. You know what's strange about this? The JVP is a left party, calls itself a left party. It was once a revolutionary party. Now, left parties don't always have to stay revolutionary. That's not my problem. They don't even have to stay socialist. But the duty of a left party is primarily to push for social justice, to present proposals and policy programs which would make society a more just and fairer society. A very good example would be Jeremy Corbyn's British Labour Party, which has its famous manifesto for the many, not the few. And they've got a great number of votes, many votes. Now, the JVP, instead of presenting an overall proposal for socio-economic reform in a progressive direction, at a time when Gotabaya has presented his own vision for Sri Lanka.
That's the Viatmaga.
The Viatmaga 2030 vision. The JVP has done no such thing, and instead it does something that left parties don't usually do anywhere in the world. It's come up with a constitutional amendment. I mean, you know, a new constitution I can understand, a new people's constitution. I'm not saying it should do that right now, but that's one of the things that parties of the left do. But just one amendment from this left socialist Marxist Leninist party, that's strange. It's like an elephant laying an egg. So what's going on here? I think what's going on is that next year is the year of the presidential election, and the JVP, like quite a few others, the JVP is running scared of a Gotabaya candidacy. I'm not saying that he doesn't have reason to be scared. What I'm saying is that the 20th Amendment is not what it seems. It's an attempt to scrap the executive presidency and therefore remove the problem to them, not necessarily to anyone else, of a candidacy that they don't like but they think can prevail. So I think this is all about Gotabaya.
Interesting thoughts there, Doctor. Now, keeping with the 20th Amendment of the Constitution, now to our viewers, the 20th Amendment to the Constitution presented by the JVP includes the abolishment of the executive presidency. Now, abolishing the executive presidency was one of the promises made by the 100 days government when they were elected, but due to some reason it did not materialize to a certain extent, except that the president promising to curtail some powers. Now, at a time like this, when 20 people are dead due to the inclement weather, 100,000 affected. The JVP coming forward with such a constitution, could it be the bidding of someone else? I mean, a constitutional amendment.
It could be a proxy move. I mean, the JVP, they're intelligent young people. I mean, not young, younger than I am. So, but I don't think there's anybody who's a particularly distinguished lawyer, or even, you know, there's no student, no graduate of constitutional law in there. I'm not even sure there's a graduate of political science. So, where is this coming from? If you haven't been a student of and some kind of expert in either constitutional law or political science, how do you produce an amendment unless you've been consulting people? Now, in years gone by, the same JVP, not under the same leadership, but the JVP would be the party that's on the ground during a natural disaster. And I do know that there are still JVPers in that leadership who are socially oriented. Sunil Handuneti, for instance, he's a guy who cares. He's the kind of guy who gets into a boat and checks out how people are doing and tries to help them. But that's no longer the JVP leadership as a whole. I don't see their presence on the ground. I mean, I see television stations like yours going out into the rural areas even before the heavy rains.
Yes.
But what television stations seem to do in terms of reaching out and telling the story of the poor people in the remote areas of the country, that's not being done by the JVP at all. So nobody really does it anymore. Maybe Sajid does a bit of it. So suddenly the JVP has been reborn as a party of one constitutional amendment. That's a very curious situation. Now, I don't think it's going to work, Zulfik, because, look, our society has the scantest regard for parliamentarians after the perpetual treasuries incident. There are 118 parliamentarians who are supposed to have got money
From Arjun Aloysius.
From Arjun Aloysius. Now, what the JVP's 20th Amendment proposes is that executive power be taken from a president who is elected by the country as a whole and requires 50% plus one vote to become the president, and taken away from such a person and given to the parliament which is known to be bribable. I mean, does this make sense to you? You give executive power, the power to decide, to implement. You take it away from someone, man or woman, who has the legitimacy of having been elected by the country taken as a whole, by the majority, 50 plus 1. And then you give it to a parliament where it is known that 118 members took money from guys who are behind bars now. So, why would anybody support such a ridiculous amendment? Would you want to have your country run not by somebody who's elected by the island taken as a whole, but by a parliament which consists of people who switch from one side to another, that's one, and two, take money from corporate entities of a dubious sort, and therefore could switch from one side to another. We saw what happened during the motion of no confidence on a huge scam, mind you, and we have a sense of how people voted and why they voted the way they did. Now, why would you want to give all power to such an institution? Why not have a separation of powers where you have an elected executive president and you have the parliament which legislates and you have the courts? What's wrong with that? So I really don't think that there's the social legitimacy for this kind of proposal. It's strange. And the JVP, again, which regards itself as a left party, should tell us why. Every country which has a left leadership retains a presidential system. Cuba, Vietnam, China, or any country which has had any kind of revolution of any sort in its history. The United States, France, Russia, I mean, take Venezuela today. These are all presidential systems. So why would this left party?
A very interesting question there, Doctor.
Yeah.
And we leave that question to you. Why? We'll be back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to Vantage Point, and we were discussing about the 20th Amendment to the Constitution that was put forward by the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, or the People's Liberation Front, commonly known as the JVP. Now, Doctor, you made a very interesting comment when we spoke about the abolishment of the executive presidency. About 118 MPs are now known to have taken money from a dubious corporate entity, of which the beneficial owner is now in remand prison until the 7th of June, when the case will be taken up again at the 4th Magistrates Court. Now, Doctor, a question that arises now is, this particular MP, Dasri Jasik, whose name is now in the open, that he took 1 million rupees from an entity attached to the Perpetual Group. Now, he says it was for his campaign as Chief Minister back in 2015. So the question is now, Doctor, isn't there any system to monitor these funding for campaigns?
Absolutely. Now, I must say that he's shown guts. He's counterattacked. He said, look, I wasn't a member of COP at this time. I was not even a parliamentarian. I came into parliament in August, and in any case, I didn't defend this guy. I've been opposing them. So it's not like I was bribed into doing something, because I've been in the forefront of the campaign against these people. But Jayasekara has also said that he wants to move legislation on campaign financing, which is a very good idea. I mean, if a man makes a mistake and he's willing to get to the root of the problem and say, look, this is all about campaign financing. I didn't know because there was no regulatory framework, and I want to make sure that there is one. I think that's not too bad. That's a good move. And his group, the SLFP's 16 rebels, want to find out the names of the 118 through the RTI, the Right to Information Act. I hope that happens, because I want to know who these 118 guys are. Everybody should know.
Everybody needs to know who they are.
And we should all know into whose hands the JVP wants to transfer executive power, because these 118 guys are among the people into whose hands executive power would go if the 20th Amendment goes through, which it won't. But it's a comedy. It's funny. It's like some kind of satirical movie, Zulfik. So much for the so much for constitutional amendments and money flows.
And speaking of money flows, Doctor, now, as you said, it is important to have some kind of legislation to monitor the campaign financing. But why has it taken so long for the country, which gained independence more than 6 decades ago, to now realize that it's time to bring in legislation, or for an MP to come forward and say, look, we need to monitor this?
Well, let me be charitable. You know, 30 years of war, there were other things to do.
Yes, true.
So, before the war, there wasn't that much corruption in Parliament. So this wasn't a big issue. There wasn't that much money going around either. I mean, all of this is possible because somebody scammed the central bank, right? And nobody scammed the central bank before. So legislation that other countries have put in place we didn't. We are lagging behind in several things. We haven't even calculated just how far back we've been pushed because of 30 years of war. We need to catch up in many spheres, and this is one of those spheres. We need to improve our framework. Otherwise, what's the lesson we have learned from the central bank bond scam? Certainly, the head of the man who picked Arjuna Mahendran and brought him over to head the central bank, that head has not rolled. So, when you look back, what are people going to say about this country? There was a central bank bond scam and 2 guys were locked up.
Let's hope it will not end from just that.
Yeah.
We hope that the investigations continue in a more stronger way to find out the real culprits and bring them to book. And speaking of legislation, Dr. Now, we spoke of the 20th Amendment, we spoke of possible legislation on monitoring campaign financing, and then we come to another important point, that is future legislation in this country.
Yeah.
As you said, we don't know how far we are behind with the current world. So in your opinion, Doctor, where do we need to find more better legislation in this country? What kind of legislation does this country need?
Well, before the legislation, you need a government that works. I would like to see a modification of the 19th Amendment. Not the scrapping of the 19th Amendment, but a modification. I say this because the pendulum has swung too far, first in one direction with the 18th Amendment, and then in another direction with the 19th Amendment, and the situation has led to a deadlock. Now, what you had initially was the 17th Amendment, which I believe Mr. Karu Jayasuriya played a major role in bringing. That was under President Rajapaksa, and it made for independent commissions. But these didn't actually work. And somebody who is very pro-reform, Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe, who was part of that process, was critical of the 17th Amendment because it just didn't work out. And especially during wartime, when tight decision-making, centralized decision-making was needed. So the 17th Amendment was junked, which is a pity. It should have been retooled. But we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and that became a habit. The 17th Amendment was replaced by the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment removed the term limits on the executive presidency. There was a 2-term limit under the 78 Constitution. Now, the removal of term limits was a swing of the pendulum in the wrong direction. Now, what the 19th Amendment did was to swing it right back, yet again in a wrong direction. It went too far, because the 19th Amendment created this situation where the Prime Minister thinks he leads the country, the President thinks he leads the country, finally nobody really leads the country. It's a deadlock. It's a bipolar situation, and it reminds me of this term in psychiatry, the bipolar syndrome. We have now, under the 19th Amendment, a bipolar syndrome in the country's constitution.
Some interesting thoughts there, Doctor. But we will continue this discussion on the constitution and the future direction of Sri Lanka right after this break. Welcome back to Vantage Point. Now, everyone is talking about who is going to be put forward as the presidential candidate for 2019. The SLFP says it's President Maithripala Sirisena. The UNP says it's going to be Ranil Wickremesinghe. Then some from the UNP who do not wish to be named say it's going to be someone else, a new leader. And then from the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, we have different views. Some saying that Gotabaya Rajapaksa might come in, some saying that Mahinda Rajapaksa might come in, and some even going on camera to say that it might even be Chamal Rajapaksa. So, Doctor, the 2019 presidential election is drawing close. We're in 2018, one more year. It's going to be very heated this time around, if I'm not mistaken. in such situation, now we've also had certain statements being made against Gotabaya Rajapaksa from the government, and then vice versa. Where is this leading up to? What's building up here?
Well, let me take it head on. Mangala Samaraveera, Minister Mangala Samaraveera, the Minister of Media and Finance, says that he's afraid of a Gotabaya candidacy or Gotabaya presidency. Now, I'm not going to debate as to whether those fears are well-founded, but I like to be helpful. And if Mangala is afraid of a Gotabaya candidacy, there's something very simple to enable him to have a good night's sleep, and I don't mean Valium. He should use his influence and revise the 19th Amendment, which exists on the statute books. It should be fairly easy. Revise the 19th Amendment so one word is put in there, and that word is consecutive. If the ban is not on a former president seeking presidential office again, but on a former president who has served 2 consecutive terms, going for a 3rd consecutive term, as in Russia, then Mahinda Rajapaksa can contest next year as the presidential candidate. Then nobody will be talking about Gotabaya, and Mangala won't have to be afraid. So what Mangala has to do is get his head straight and ask himself, is he more afraid of Mahinda or Gotabaya? Because there's nobody the UNP can put forward who can beat Gotabaya. I mean, Sajid can come close, but the UNP is probably not going to give him nomination in time to make a fight of it. So it's going to be Ranil versus Gotabaya, and you know, that's not even going to be pretty. So if Mangala is
not pretty in what context?
Gotabaya is going to stomp him. You know, he's going to cream him. There's not even going to be a fight. I mean, Ranil has never won a presidential election. Never. He's won. He's become prime minister twice, when the electorate has been very sure that somebody else is the president. But they've never made him president. They're never going to make him president this time after a disastrous economic performance. Not to mention the central bank bond scam. So Ranil versus Gotabaya, Ranil versus anybody, he's going to lose. And if Mangala doesn't want Gotabaya to win, what he has to do is take the handcuffs off Mahinda Rajapaksa by the simple expedient of introducing a modification, a readjustment to the existing 19th Amendment. Then Mahinda will run and Mangala can sleep happily.
Doctor, speaking on this candidates and this topic, a question that has been posed to when I go out, that has been posed to me, that I wish to ask you on this program, that is, now we have politicians who are having various accusations against them. For example, Prime Minister is facing the accusation of the bond scam. Everyone say that he is the mastermind behind it, so he has that allegation against him. And then if you talk about the former president,
you know, new government might actually investigate that. Huh? He might find himself investigated. There's no immunity for the Prime Minister.
Yes. And then for the former president Mahinda Rajapaksa, there is allegation on the helping Hambantota. Then Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, there is the MIG deal, which includes Udayanka Weeratunga, who is held in Dubai. Now the list goes on. Like almost all the parliamentarians and former MPs and ministers have certain allegations against them. We saw one of them coming to FCID yesterday. So in this situation where our politicians are facing so many allegations against him, isn't there any system that the people should put in place to not elect anyone who faces a charge until proven innocent?
Well, no, Zulfikar. I mean, one of the fundamentals of law, unless you're talking about the French system, because in the French system, you're guilty until proven innocent. But in a larger part of the world, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
So simply because somebody files a charge against you, it doesn't mean that you can be struck off some register, because it could be untrue.
Yes, could be unfounded as well.
So that wouldn't do. I think the legislation on campaign financing is a good idea.
To follow the money trail from where the money comes.
Yes, absolutely.
So you believe that would actually enable the people to have a more transparent approach towards who they are voting for.
Yes, and you've already got a case, the central bank bond scam. This government or any future government should investigate it thoroughly, appoint, if necessary, a special presidential commission, because what was appointed was a presidential commission, and remove the civic rights of whoever was responsible. And that would be an emblematic case that will teach political leaders a lesson.
And also a good point that teaching political leaders a lesson. We heard over the years a lot of talk about introducing a code of ethics for parliamentarians. That doesn't seem to be happening now.
Well, who's going to introduce a code of ethics for parliamentarians? The parliamentarians themselves. I mean, who are these guys who can legislate on ethics? I don't see anybody who can do that unless it's the senior most religious leaders of all religions, a kind of a multi-religious group which consists of the highest, not every chief priest, but the chief priest of the main sects, plus the heads of the institutionalized religions, of all the institutionalized religions. Then perhaps you could have a code of ethics drawing from the ethical roots of the 4 major religions that are practiced in Sri Lanka. Now that's an idea, but otherwise I can't think of who has the right to legislate on ethics. Certainly not civil society. I mean, we don't know where these civil society organizations get their money from anyway. So they are hardly guardians of society's ethics. It's perhaps only the senior most religious leaders who can propose something on that subject.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for those very insightful thoughts, especially on the Code of Ethics and the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. And that is all the time we have on tonight's edition of Vantage Point. And we leave you with a question. Are our parliamentarians doing their job properly? And how should these ethics be formed in order to get them to work for you, the voters? With that, that's a wrap of Vantage Point. I'm Zulfiq Farzan. Good night.